They say every debt in soul is paid in either won or blood, but my father found a third currency, me. I spent 3 years at the top of my class at Seoul National, learning how to use the law to fix a broken world, only to find out I'd been used as collateral before I was old enough to hold a pen. 20 years of my life traded for a gambler's second chance. Now I'm standing in a neon-drenched nightmare with a man who treats my skin like a conquest and my mind like a weapon. He calls it a 90-day contract. He calls it a performance. But as Choi Jin-hyuk pulls me into the shadows of a city that never sleeps, I'm starting to realize the law won't save me here. In this world, the only thing more dangerous than the debt is the man who came to collect it. The rain was coming down in sheets, that heavy Seoul summer rain that smells like hot asphalt and old cigarette filters. Inside the study, the air was dead. Samuel sat there, looking like a man who'd already been buried, his skin gone a sickly shade of gray. He was holding a piece of paper that looked like it had been pulled out of a fire 20 years ago. Elara stood by the window, her height making the room feel even smaller than it was. Her skin was deep, rich, like the dark heart of a forest, and right now she looked ready to burn the whole house down. "You did what, Baba?" She didn't scream. It was worse. It was that low, vibrating tone she used when she was dissecting a case for law school. "I didn't have a choice, Elara. They were going to kill us. Your mother was sick, and the business. It was a different time." Samuel's voice was thin, like wet tissue paper. "So you signed me away." She walked over and snatched the paper. Her eyes scanned the Hanja characters she'd spent years mastering. It was all there, the blood pact, the collateral, him. "It's a debt, Elara, a blood debt." "No," she said, her voice cracking just a tiny bit. "It's a bill of sale." Then the front door just stopped being closed. There wasn't a fancy knock or a polite hello, just the sound of heavy boots on the hardwood and the smell of expensive cologne and cold rain. Choi Jin-hyuk walked in, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. He was huge, not just tall, but wide, the kind of man who looks like he's built out of stone and bad intentions. He had this scar running down his jaw that made him look like he'd crawled his way out of a grave, and his eyes were so dark you couldn't tell where the pupil ended. He looked at Samuel for a second, then dismissed him like a piece of furniture. His gaze landed on Elara. He didn't blink. He just stared at her, taking in her height, the sharp line of her cheekbones, the way her Nigerian heritage made her look like royalty, even in a cramped, dusty room. "You're taller than your father," Jin-hyuk said. His voice was deep, a real floor shaker. "And you're late," Elara shot back. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she'd be damned if she let him see it. Jin-hyuk actually let out a short, dry sound that might have been a laugh if he had any humor in him. He stepped closer, stepping right into her space until she could smell the sandalwood on his skin. He reached out, slow, like he was touching something fragile, and ran his thumb along her jaw. His skin was hot. 90 days, he murmured. "That's all I need. My brothers think I'm a beast. I need a queen to prove them wrong. Someone respectable. Someone who doesn't look like she belongs in a gutter." "And after the 90 days?" Elara asked. She was leaning away, but her skin was humming where he touched her. "Then you're free. Your father keeps his head. You go back to your books." "You're lying," she said. "Probably." He gripped her chin, forcing her to look at him. "But it's the only deal you've got, so grab your bag. We're leaving." He didn't wait for her to agree. He just turned and walked out, expecting her to follow. And the thing is, she did. Because Samuel was crying in his chair, and the man in the rain had her life in his pocket. Outside by the car, he grabbed her arm and pulled her into him. The rain was blurring everything, the neon lights of the city turning into smears of blue and red. He didn't say anything. He just leaned down and crushed his mouth against hers. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was messy. It was desperate. It tasted like rain and salt, and a kind of hunger that made her stomach flip. She wanted to bite him. She wanted to run. But for a second, she just held on to the lapels of his coat while the world went sideways. He pulled away, his breath hot against her face. "Day one," he whispered. Then he pushed her into the back of the car and slammed the door. The penthouse was too quiet. That was the first thing Elara noticed. It was all glass and white marble, an expensive silence, 80 floors above the noise of the city. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a showroom for a life she didn't want. She spent the first 3 days pacing. Jin-hyuk was barely there. He'd vanish before the sun came up and come back smelling like smoke and scotch long after she'd pretended to go to sleep. On the 4th night, she was in the kitchen trying to figure out how to work a coffee machine that had more buttons than a cockpit. She was wearing one of his shirts. It was the only thing that fit her shoulders, and her legs felt miles long in the moonlight hitting the floor. "It's the second button from the left." She nearly jumped out of her skin. Jin-hyuk was leaning against the doorframe, his tie undone and hanging around his neck like a noose. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, his hair a mess. He looked human for once. "I don't want coffee," she said, even though she was holding a mug. "I want to know what the plan is. You dragged me here. You kissed me in the street like you owned me. And now I'm just, what, decorative?" Jin-hyuk walked over, his boots heavy on the marble. He didn't stop until he was right in front of her, leaning his hip against the counter. He took the mug out of her hand and set it down. "We start rehearsals tomorrow," he said. His voice was a low rasp, the kind that makes the back of your neck prickle. "My brothers are throwing a dinner. They're going to poke at you. They're going to try to find the seams in the story. I need you to be perfect." "I'm a law student, Jin-hyuk. I deal in facts. This is a lie." "So make it a fact." He reached out and traced the line of her collarbone. His fingers were calloused, rough against her skin. "Tell me something real. Why did you really stay in Seoul? It wasn't just for your father." Elara looked at him, really looked at him, the way the light caught that scar on his jaw. "Because I wanted to be the one who puts people like you away. I wanted to be the one who makes the world make sense." He laughed then, a real dark sound. "And now you're sleeping in my bed." "I'm sleeping in your guest room." He moved closer, his hand sliding up to the back of her neck, his thumb resting right under her ear. The heat coming off him was intense. It was that middle of the night kind of gravity, where everything feels heavier and the stakes feel higher. He leaned down, his mouth hovering just over hers. She could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the faint amber flecks in his eyes. "Show me," he whispered. "Show me how much you hate this." He didn't wait for an answer. He hopped her up onto the cold marble of the kitchen island and stepped between her legs, his hands gripping her waist like he was afraid she'd fly away. The kiss was slow this time. agonizing. It wasn't the claim of the first night. It was a question. His tongue traced the line of her lip, and Elara felt her head fall back, her fingers tangling in the silk of his tie. She hated him. She really did. But she also wanted to pull him closer until there wasn't any air left between them. It was messy and confusing, and her skin felt like it was on fire. He moved his hand to her thigh, his fingers bunching the fabric of the shirt, and for a second, the rest of the world, the debt, the brothers, the law, just stopped existing. He pulled back, his eyes dark and blown out. He was breathing hard. "Rehearsal's over," he said, his voice thick. He turned and walked out of the kitchen without looking back, leaving her sitting on the counter with her heart hammering and the coffee machine finally starting to hiss in the silence. The gala was held in a ballroom that felt like a gilded cage. Crystal chandeliers everywhere, looking like frozen explosions, and enough champagne to drown the city. Jin-hyuk was back in his element, dark suit, cold eyes, looking like a man who had already won. He kept his hand on the small of my back the whole night. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a try and move touch. "Just keep breathing," he whispered in my ear. His breath was warm, smelling of peppermint and expensive gin. "My brother, Dae-ho, is at 2:00. He's the one who'll try to trip you up. Don't let him." I looked over and saw a man who looked like a thinner, meaner version of Jin-hyuk. He was watching us like a hawk watching a rabbit. I pulled myself up to my full height, making sure the gold silk of my dress caught the light. If I was going to be a trophy, I was going to be the kind that cuts your hands if you grab it wrong. "I've dealt with harder professors than your brother," I said, my voice as smooth as the silk on my hips. We hit the dance floor when the music slowed down to something heavy and soulful. He pulled me in tight, way tighter than a normal fiancé would. My chest was pressed against his, and I could feel the hard line of his holster through his jacket. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I'm not," I lied. "You are." He stopped moving right in the middle of the floor. Everyone was watching. I could feel their eyes like pins on my skin. He tilted my chin up, his thumb grazing my lower lip. "Let them see it, Elara. Let them see how much you want me." He kissed me right there, in front of the syndicate, in front of the cameras, in front of his brothers. It was a deep, possessive thing that made my toes curl in my heels. It didn't feel like a performance anymore. It felt like he was trying to swallow my soul. My hands found the back of his neck, my fingers knotting in his hair, and for a second, I forgot why I was supposed to hate him. The ride back in the limo was a different story. The door hadn't even fully clicked shut before the silence in the car became unbearable. We were sitting in the dark, the neon lights of Seoul flickering over his face as we sped through the city. He didn't say a word. He just reached across the leather seat and grabbed my wrist, pulling me over until I was straddling his lap. The gold dress was hiked up, my skin hot against the dark fabric of his trousers. "Jin-hyuk," I started, but he cut me off. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, his teeth grazing my skin. Just don't talk." He was holding me so hard it almost hurt, his hands roaming over my back, tracing the spine he called my obsidian armor. The car hit a bump, jarring us together, and I let out a sound that wasn't a protest. It was a blur of hands and teeth and the smell of the city outside. He tasted like the whiskey he'd been nursing all night, dark, smoky, and dangerous. The hunger in the car was different from the kitchen. It was desperate, like he was trying to find something in me that he'd lost a long time ago. By the time the car pulled into the penthouse garage, we were both a mess. He let go of me, his chest heaving, his eyes avoiding mine as he smoothed down his jacket. "Get inside," he said, his voice back to that cold, distant rasp. He stayed in the car. I stood on the concrete floor of the garage, adjusting my dress, watching the tinted windows. I was a law student. I knew how to build a case, and right now, the evidence was screaming that I was falling for a man who would probably be the death of me. It was day 45, and the air in the penthouse felt like it was about to snap. Jin Hyuk had been gone for 18 hours. When he finally kicked the door open, he looked like he'd been through a meat grinder. His knuckles were split. His white shirt was ruined with grease and something darker, and he had this frantic, buzzing energy coming off him. He didn't even look at me. He just went straight for the bar, poured a glass of something clear, and downed it in one go. "What happened?" I asked. I was standing by the big floor-to-ceiling window, watching the rain blur the lights of the city. "My brothers," he spat. He sounded like he was chewing on glass. "They tried to box me in at the docks. Thought they could take a chunk out of me before the vote. They thought wrong." He walked over to me. He didn't stop until he was close enough that I could smell the metallic tang of blood and the rain on his skin. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw it then. The mask was completely gone. No dry wit, no black sheep act. Just a man who was tired of fighting the world. "You're bleeding," I said, reaching up to touch a cut near his eye. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight, his pulse thudding against my palm. "I don't care about the blood, Elara. I'm tired of the pretending. I'm tired of the 90 days. I'm tired of looking at you and having to act like I don't want to tear the world apart just to keep you." He pushed me back against the glass. The cold of the window hit my spine, and the heat of him hit everything else. It was 80 stories of nothingness behind me, and the only thing that felt real in front of me. "Then don't act," I whispered. He didn't hesitate. He kissed me like it was the only thing keeping him alive. It wasn't the performance from the gala or the rehearsal from the kitchen. This was raw. It was desperate. It was the sound of my dress fabric straining and his hands finding the skin of my waist, his fingers digging in like he was trying to leave a permanent mark. I wrapped my legs around his hips, pulling him into me, my hands frantic as I tried to get his shirt open. I wanted to feel his skin, the scars, the heat, all of it. The glass behind us rattled as he pressed into me, the city lights flickering like dying stars in the background. It was a total surrender. No law, no debt, no Choi family bullshit, just the weight of his body and the way my name sounded when he groaned it into my neck. I could feel his heart hammering against mine, 2 different rhythms finally finding a single, violent beat. Everything was a blur of friction and heavy breathing, and the rain drumming against the window like it was trying to get in. For the first time since I'd been dragged into this cage, I wasn't thinking about an exit strategy. I didn't want to be a prosecutor. I didn't want to be a student. I just wanted to be right here, in the dark, with the monster who'd finally stopped lying. When it was over, we stayed there for a long time, tangled together against the cold glass. The city kept moving below us, millions of people living normal lives. But up here, the air felt different, thicker. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his thumb tracing the line of my lower lip. His eyes were softer than I'd ever seen them. "You know this changes everything," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. "I know," I said, catching his hand and kissing his bruised knuckles. But out in the hallway, his phone started buzzing. The world was coming for us. And I knew right then that the next 45 days weren't going to be about a contract. They were going to be about survival. The engagement party was supposed to be the final nail in his brother's coffins. We were at the Choi estate, a place that looked like a temple but felt like a graveyard. I was draped in white silk, my hair pulled back so tight it hurt, looking every bit the loyal bride. Jin-hyuk stood beside me, his hand never leaving my waist. He looked calm, but I could feel the tension in his muscles, like a spring wound too tight. "Stay close," he whispered, his eyes scanning the balcony. "Something's off. The air feels too thin." He was right. One second I was nodding at some ancient auntie in diamonds, and the next, the glass doors didn't just break, they exploded. Gunfire chewed up the white roses and the silk drapes. People weren't screaming yet. They were just staring at the blood on their shoes. "Down!" Jin-hyuk roared. He tackled me behind a heavy oak table, just as a line of bullets stitched across the wood. He didn't look scared. He looked focused. He pulled a gun from his holster with a practiced, terrifying smoothness and started returning fire. "My brothers," he spat, his eyes cold. The cowards couldn't wait for the vote. He grabbed my hand, his grip crushing. We ran, not toward the exits, they were blocked, but toward the back of the estate where the woods met the cliffs. We reached his motorcycle, a black beast idling in the shadows. I hopped on behind him, my silk dress tearing as I wrapped my legs around his waist. We tore out of there, the sound of the engine drowning out the chaos behind us. The safe house was a concrete box hidden in the mountains, 2 hours north of the city. It smelled like dust and old rain. The second we got inside, Jin-hyuk kicked the door shut and threw the bolts. He turned to me, his chest heaving, his face splattered with a few drops of someone else's blood. "Are you hit?" He was frantic, his hands roaming over my arms, my shoulders, my face. "Elara, talk to me. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm fine, Jin-hyuk." The adrenaline hit us both at the same time. It was that we're still alive realization that turns into something else entirely. He grabbed me, his mouth crashing into mine with a desperate, shaky violence. We didn't even make it to the bed. He pushed me against the cold concrete wall, his hands tangling in the white silk of my ruined dress. It was messy. It was frantic. We were both still breathing hard from the escape, our hearts thudding against each other like a war drum. He tasted like copper and wood smoke, and I couldn't get enough of him. I needed to feel him, the heat of his skin, the hardness of his body, to know the world hadn't ended yet. He moved his hands to my hips, lifting me up, and for a second, the only thing that existed was the sound of our breathing and the way his skin felt against mine. It wasn't about the 90 days anymore. It wasn't about the debt. It was just us, two people caught in a storm, clinging to each other because everything else had been blown away. Later, as the moon hit the floor of the bunker, he held me tight. He didn't say it, but I could feel it in the way he wouldn't let go. The brothers would be looking for us. The coup wasn't over. But for tonight, in the middle of nowhere, the only thing that mattered was that we were still breathing. "We finish this tomorrow," he whispered into my hair. "We finish it together," I said. And I realized, for the first time, I actually meant it. The yacht was called the Obsidian, and it sat on the yellow sea like a jagged piece of flint. The air out here was cold, tasting of salt and heavy mist. This was it, the final reckoning. The elders were gathered in the main cabin, their faces like stone, waiting to see if Jin-hyuk was a king or a corpse. Jin-hyuk stood on the deck, his arm in a sling, his face pale but his eyes burning. I was right there next to him. I wasn't wearing white silk anymore. I had on a sharp black suit and a folder full of bank records that I'd spent 48 hours digging out of the syndicate's hidden servers. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice a low, rough sand against the wind. "I'm a lawyer, Jin-hyuk," I said, adjusting my lapels. "I don't lose cases." The confrontation was short and brutal. His brothers tried to lie, tried to claim he was the one who staged the coup, but I laid the records on the table like a guillotine. I showed them the wire transfers, the hitman contracts, the systematic rot they'd built behind the chairman's back. It ended in a flash of movement. Dae-ho, the oldest, realized the room had turned. He pulled a compact pistol from his sleeve and leveled it at my chest. "If I lose, nobody wins," he hissed. He fired. Jin-hyuk didn't even think. He threw his body in front of mine, the sound of the shot muffled by the heavy fabric of his coat. He went down hard, his blood splattering the mahogany floor, but he didn't stop. He pulled his own piece with his good hand and ended it. One shot, clean. The silence that followed was deafening. The elders looked at the bodies, then at the blood on Jin-hyuk's shirt, and finally at me. They nodded once. The debt was settled. The throne was his. I got him back to the master cabin while the crew cleaned the deck. He was gray, sweating, the bullet having torn through the meat of his side, but he was alive. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking as I cut away his shirt to dress the wound. "You're an idiot," I whispered, my voice thick. "You could have died. And let you miss your graduation?" He tried to smirk, but it turned into a wince. He reached up with his steady hand and cupped my cheek. "The 90 days are up, Elara. The papers are signed. Your father is clear. You can go." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the man who had terrified me, the man who had claimed me, and the man who had just nearly died to keep a bullet from touching my skin. The law student in me wanted to run. The woman in me couldn't move an inch. "Is that what you want?" I asked. "For me to go?" "I want you to be happy," he said. "But I think I'm addicted to the way you look at me when you're angry." I didn't answer with words. I leaned down and kissed him, a slow, reverent thing that tasted of copper and the sea. It was a union of two broken things. I moved carefully, avoiding his wound, my skin hot against his as we tangled together in the dark cabin. The yacht swayed with the rhythm of the waves, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I was drowning. He held me like I was the only thing keeping the boat afloat. The power balance had shifted. He owned the syndicate, but I realized, as his fingers traced the line of my spine, that I owned the man. "So," he murmured against my neck as the sun began to peek through the porthole, "what's the first thing the wife of a chairman does?" I looked at the horizon, at the city of Seoul waiting for us in the distance. "She makes sure the chairman stays in line," I said. He laughed, a low, tired sound, and pulled me closer. The debt was erased, but the real story was just getting started. And as the boat turned back toward the shore, I knew one thing for sure. The world had no idea what was coming for it.